This is Manuel Bravo. I'm going to present UniStore. This is a joint work with Alexey, Gotsman, and Borja de Régil from IMDEA Software Institute and Hengfeng from Nanjing University. So nowadays, online services are global, having clients from all around the world. And geo-replication helps improving user experience by replicating the servers across different geographical locations and letting clients to access the closest site. However, it makes it challenging to maintain data consistency. So on the one hand, if we implement strong consistency, it's great because it makes replication transparent, but since it requires synchronization in the critical path, it translates into high response times and availability during network partitions. On the other hand, if we implement weak consistency, it doesn't require synchronization in the critical path, so it offers low response times and high availability, but on the other hand, is unable to preserve critical application invariants. So there's a solution to this trade-off, which is the hybrid alternative, in which multiple consistency levels are allowed to coexist, and programmers can choose whether to execute a particular operation under strong or weak consistency. So for instance, if the execution of an operation may violate an application invariant, then the programmer should execute it under strong consistency. Partial order restrictions, or POR for short, is one of these hybrid models in which operations can be classified as causal or strong. Causal operations satisfy causal consistency, which means that clients observes operations in an order that respects potential causality. And strong operations give the programmer more control over causally independent operations, which otherwise can be executed in any arbitrary order. So let's take a look to an example, to a banking application in which we can make deposits and withdrawals to a bank account. Let's assume that the application wants to maintain this invariant that says that an account cannot go below 0. So for instance, deposits to the same account can be executed under weak consistency without no problem. So according to the POR model, they should be marked as causal. So let's assume we have two replicas, one in the States and one in Europe. And we are interested in what's happening with both accounts. So let's assume we have two clients executing deposits concurrently at different replicas. Since we are executing these operations under weak consistency, it doesn't require synchronization in the critical path. So each of the replicas is going to check internally that by executing these operations, no invariance is violated, and then they're going to commit before communicating to any other replica. So this is what happens here. And then afterwards, in the background, replicas will synchronize. They will exchange the operations that have been executed. So in this case, they will both exchange both operations and end up with the same account balance, which is okay. Let's see what happened with withdrawals. So let's try to execute them under weak consistency. So let's assume that Bob account has 200 euros at the moment and that replicas are fully synchronized at this point. So we are going to withdraw money concurrently from both replicas. What's happening now is that since there is no synchronization or coordination between replicas, because we are executing this under weak consistency, both are going to commit because no operation violates the application invariance by itself. The problem comes afterwards when these replicas synchronize and operations are exchanged. Both replicas will end up with a balance which is below 0, which violates the application invariant. But at this point, it's too late because the money is already gone. So POR proposes to solve this by allowing clients, as we said, to execute a particular operation under strong consistency. And to this end, the programmer provides a symmetric conflict relation on operations. Any operation involved in the conflict relation is marked as strong. And POR guarantees that out of two conflicting strong transactions, one has to observe the other. So going back to our banking application, let's assume now that the withdrawals to the same account are executed under strong consistency. So now what's happened is that before we commit these operations, even though they won't violate the application invariant locally, there is some coordination between the replicas. The replicas, what they're going to do, they're going to establish an order in which these operations must be executed. So in this case, we are going to execute the withdrawal of 100 euros before the other operation. And since we have 200 euros in the account, and we are only trying to get 100, this is going to commit. And then we are going to return to the client. When we try to execute, we update the balance. Now we only have 100 euros. And when we try to withdraw 200 euros, so this is not going to work because this will violate the application invariant. So we are going to tell Bob that we cannot give him the money because he doesn't have enough money in the account. And this way, the application invariant is maintained. In this work, we present UniStore. UniStore is the first fault-tolerant and scalable data store that combines causal and strong consistency. It implements a transactional variant of POR consistency, such that operations may span multiple data items. And it guarantees transactional causal consistency by default and allows the programmer to additionally specify which pairs of transactions conflict. Therefore, which transactions have to be executed under strong consistency. The causal baseline of UniStore is CURE, which is a scalable implementation of transactional causal consistency. In UniStore, a causal transaction first executes as a single data center on a causally consistent snapshot. After this, it commits, and its updates are replicated to all other data centers in the background. Strong transactions are executed under optimistic concurrency control. This means that these are first executed speculatively, and the results of this execution are then certified to determine whether the transaction can commit or not. Of course, this certification requires synchronization between all replicas. And in UniStore, we use an existing fault-tolerant protocol that combines two-phase commit and Paxos. The key challenge is to maintain liveness despite data center failures. And this is not that simple. As simply adding a Paxos-based commit protocol, a fault-tolerant Paxos-based commit protocol for strong transactions to an existing causally consistent protocol does not yield a fault-tolerant data store as we saw next. Let's take a look to the following scenario. Here we have 3 data centers, one in the States, one in Europe, and one in Asia. Let's assume we have a client in the States that issues a causal operation T1, and after that issues a strong operation T2, which is going to depend on the causal operation T1. After the speculative execution of T2 is submitted for certification, which requires coordination between the replicas. Since there is no concurrent conflicting transaction, then the certification service will decide to commit the transaction. Note that the data center in the US will be able to expose T2 immediately to other transactions, meaning that other transactions will be able to read T2 locally because it already replicates T2 and the dependencies of T2, which in this case is T1. Nevertheless, the other data centers won't be able to expose it until they receive T1 from the States. Let's assume that now the data center in the US crashes before replicating T1. So the problem that we're going to have is that T1 is lost. Therefore, T2 will never be exposed to other transactions in Europe or Asia. And this is a big problem. So what it could happen is that a client in Asia submits a transaction, T3, strong transaction, which is going to conflict with T2. And after the speculative execution is going to submit it for certification. And the certification service is going to realize that T3 didn't observe T2 because the data center in Asia didn't expose T2 to other transactions yet because it doesn't have T1. And therefore, it's going to decide to abort transaction T3. So, and this is a big problem because it's not only T3 that's going to abort, but any transaction conflicting with T2 won't be able to commit from now on. So in the related work, we have some solutions that are mixing causal and strong consistency in a fault-tolerant manner, but they don't support highly available causal operations and vice versa. On top of that, previous solutions aren't scalable, so they don't include mechanisms for partitioning the key space among different machines, as we do. And some of them include per data center centralized services, which limits the scalability of their solutions. The way UniStore solves this problem of liveness is through uniformity. So UniStore ensures that all causal dependencies of a strong transaction are uniform before certification. So uniform means that both the transaction and its causal dependencies are guaranteed to be eventually replicated at all correct data centers. So this will prevent the scenario that we were discussing before. In this case, T2 won't be committed before T1 is replicated in at least one correct data center. And UniStore considers a transaction to be uniform once it's visible at F+1 data centers. Since we are assuming a maximum of F data center failures, then this guarantees that at least one of these data centers must be correct. On top of that, UniStore integrates a mechanism that allows data centers to forward causal transactions to others. Other features are causal transactions are executed in a snapshot that is slightly in the past. This is to guarantee that strong transactions may only depend on uniform transactions, and this serves to minimize the latency of strong transactions. The protocol that tracks uniformity is fully decentralized and lightweight and runs in the background. And we reuse this mechanism to let clients make causal transactions durable on demand and enable consistent client migration. Finally, I'm going to move to the evaluation. So we built our prototype in Erlang. We benchmark it in Amazon EC2 in 3 different regions. We use the Ruby's benchmark, which is a popular benchmark that emulates an online auction website such as eBay. It includes 15 transactions, out of which 4 transactions are strong, and declares 3 conflicts between them. So we use a mixed workload with 15% of update transactions, which yields a 10% of strong transactions. So here we're going to see how throughput and average latency evolves as we increase the number of clients. And we're going to see the throughput and the average latency on their saturation point. So we compare against causal. This is a baseline that implements causal consistency as a special case of UniStore, where all transactions are causal. So this baseline cannot implement Ruby's correctly, but it gives an upper bound on the expected performance. A second baseline is strong, which implements serializability as a special case of UniStore, where all transactions are strong. And the last baseline is red-blue, which implements red-blue consistency, which is also a hybrid model, and also combines causal and strong consistency. However, it declares conflicts between all strong transactions, so it allows less concurrency than UniStore. As we can see, UniStore exhibits a high throughput at their saturation point, which is 72% and 183% higher than red, blue, and strong, respectively. Regarding latency, UniStore exhibits an average latency of 16.5 milliseconds, lower than 80.4 milliseconds of strong. And in comparison to red, blue, they both exhibit a similar latency, and this is because both systems mark the same set of transactions as strong. In comparison to causal, UniStore penalizes throughput by 45%, and this is the unavoidable price to pay to preserve application-specific invariance. Finally, when looking at the latency of each type of transactions, strong transactions in UniStore exhibit a latency of 73%, 73 milliseconds on average, which is dominated by the round-trip time between Virginia and its closest data center, which is California. And this is because certification requires coordination between replicas. On the other hand, causal transactions exhibit a very low latency, which is only 1.2 milliseconds on average, which is comparable to that of causal. And this demonstrates that UniStore is able to mix causal and strong consistency effectively. This concludes my talk. UniStore is the first fault-tolerant scalable data store that combines causal and strong consistency. It combines both consistency models effectively, and we expect that these ideas will pave the way for particle systems that combine causal and strong consistency. Thank you very much.